Today we're gonna talk about the practical aspect of the heart. As you know, we talked about the lung and some of the mediastinal structure in the last session. So today we're going to continue to discuss the heart, structure of the heart, border, surface, chambers of the heart, then the blood supply of the heart. Okay? So, you know the heart is the muscular organ which is responsible for pumping the blood to the different part of the body and also to pump the blood to the pulmonary circulation to be deoxygenated, comes back to the heart, pumped again for the different part of the body. So, we mentioned in our lecture that the heart, the position usually will be like this. Again, please. So the position will be in this manner. The orientation of the heart will be like this. So we have, this is the right border, okay? This is the left border, this is the apex, this is the inferior border. Inferior border, right border, and then we have, we mentioned that the heart has right border, left border, inferior border, and then anterior surface. This is the anterior surface. Then we have the diaphragmatic surface. This is the diaphragmatic surface or the inferior surface. Then we have the posterior. Then we have the posterior surface or the base. Okay, this is the base, which is located in base, usually located opposite to the apex. The right border formed by the right atrium. Okay. The inferior border formed by the mainly right ventricle. Right ventricle, the inferior border formed by right ventricle and small contribution of the right atrium. Left border formed mainly by the left ventricle. Okay? Left ventricle and part of the upper part here we have the left atrium. So, the diaphragmatic surface, we have both. Left ventricle, this is right ventricle. They are separated by having groove for the interventricular septum, يسموها posterior interventricular groove. Okay? Anteriorly, this groove that separates between the right ventricle and left ventricle, and it marks the interventricular septum. So this is called externally on the anterior surface. This is the anterior interventricular groove. This groove. Right. So as we mentioned that the heart consists of 4 chambers, and then 2 atria and 2 ventricles. The right chamber of the heart, and then we have the right atrium and right ventricle. They are connected with each other through the right atrioventricular orifice. This right atrioventricular orifice is guarded by tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve. Then we mentioned that the right atrium consists of the cavity of the right atrium consists of two main parts. And the atrium proper, or the main cavity of the atrium, if you see here, so if you look here, you see this part, all this part has a smooth wall. Okay? Smooth wall. هذا هو المين cavity. Atrium proper. Here, this part is separated by a sulcus here from the auricle. This is the auricle, which is like مثل auricle مالت الإير. شلون مثل it's like auricular projection. It's separated by a sulcus. You see here. This part, this is the auricular part, and this is the atrium proper, main cavity. There's, you see the auricle, it's تكون عادة ridged. It has a muscular ridge. هذه الridge طبعا it's more clear anteriorly. You see here. هذه تشوفونها عبارة عن muscular ridge. هذه muscular ridge called pectinate muscle or musculo-pectinating. هذه وين موجودة? Within the auricle. And here the auricle separated from the main cavity. Inside we have the crista terminalis. هذه boundary هنا هذه هو crista terminalis. تشوفونها هذه boundary ما بين smooth part وال ridged or roughened part. Okay. Externally هذه this is the هذا الجروف. Sorry, this sulcus. هذه sulcus تشوفونها. هذه called sulcus terminalis. So crista terminalis from inside, from outside, it is the sulcus terminalis, which separates between the main cavity of the atrium and the auricle. واضح? So, main cavity or atrium proper, auricle, which contains the pectinate muscle. Internally, they are separated by crista terminalis. Externally, they are separated by sulcus terminalis. Posteromedially, this is the septum that separates between two atria. So, the left atrium, this is the right atrium, and this is the interatrial septum, okay, or atrial septum. هذا atrial septum. Within the atrial septum, there is a depression. إذا تشوفونها هذه في الواضح. So this depression, هذه circular shape, هذه fossa ovalis or oval fossa. It's a depression where the right atrial side within the on the surface of the atrial septum or interatrial septum. The upper border of it here, this called annulus ovale or oval annulus. Well, now it's very clear here. So the upper border if you see here, so this is the fossa, okay? هذه fossa ovale or oval fossa. The upper border هذه هو annulus ovale. واضح؟ كأن annulus ovale marks the lower border of the septum secundum above. والجوة هذه الفوسا ovale and below it marks the remnants of the septum primum. هذا embryological origin of that. If you see here, from the other side, الفوسا ovale and annulus ovale are less distinctive. تكون أقل وضوحا بال left atrial side. واضح؟ So these are the important anatomical landmark here. So the right atrium received the opening of the superior vena cava and also the opening of the inferior vena cava. This is the opening of the inferior vena cava. And then we have the opening of the coronary sinus. هذه opening تشوفونها. This is the opening of the coronary sinus, which is located between the opening of the inferior vena cava posteriorly and the atrioventricular aortus. So هذه atrioventricular aortus, right atrioventricular aortus. And then we have the inferior vena cava. Between them, we have the opening of the coronary sinus. Coronary sinus is the main vein of the heart. هذه coronary sinus. Here opens between the right atrioventricular orifice and anteriorly with inferior vena cava posterior. So in addition to many small veins which opens directly into the wall of the right atrium. Any questions so far? Right. So about the right ventricle. The right ventricle, you can see the wall is much more thicker than the wall of the atrium. Okay? And it has a rough, or you see the wall of the right ventricle, it has a roughened ridge, muscular ridge, the rough muscular ridge called trabeculae carni. Trabeculae carni or carni. In trabeculae carni, we said that there are three forms of trabeculae carni. We have the papillary muscle. The papillary muscle, you see, it attached to the wall of the ventricle from base. The apex of the papillary muscle attached to cord-like structure called musculotendiny. Chorda tendini. This is these are chorda tendini that attach to the apex of the papillary muscle. Then the other end of the chorda tendini attached to the edge of the ventricular surface of the cusp of the tricuspid valve. So this is the tricuspid valve. Tricuspid, it means it has three cusp of the valve. Anterior, then we have the posterior, then septum. So this is the, so we have septal here. This is septal, posterior, anterior cusp. Tricuspid valve. And we have 2 or 3 papillary muscles. So this is 1, okay, 2 here, and the chorda tendini, and this is the third one, okay? Chorda tendini attached to these papillary muscles. So papillary muscle and chorda tendini. Papillary muscle is the first form of the trabeculae carni. The second form is moderator band. Moderator band, it's a band that connects between the anterior wall of the heart and the interventricular septum. فهذه هو المودريتر band. تشوفونه. This is the moderator band. Okay, connecting between the interventricular septum and the anterior wall of the right ventricle. So in between them, it's free. In the core of the moderator band, there is a right bundle branch of the conducting system. هسه نجي على conducting system. Okay, so this is the second form of the trabeculae carni اللي هو moderator band. Moderator band, papillary muscle. Then we have the ordinary prominent ridge اللي هو trabeculae carni, the third form. Okay, so ordinary prominent ridge in trabeculae carni, papillary muscle. Then we have the moderator band. واضح؟ right ventricle receive the blood from the right atrium through the right atrioventricular orifice, which is guarded by tricuspid valve, which has three cusps, anterior, posterior, and septal. The septal cusp attached to the septum. واضح؟ Then the right ventricle will during diastole, when the heart relaxed, the blood will follow from the right atrium to the right ventricle. Then during systole, during contraction of the heart, the atrioventricular orifice will shut, and the blood will follow through the pulmonary trunk, the anterior part of the right ventricle, through the pulmonary trunk to the pulmonary trunk. You see, pass through the pulmonary trunk and through the right and left pulmonary arteries to the pulmonary circulation, the lungs. This part of the outlet of the right ventricle here inside, you see it's funnel shape here. This part is funnel shape. This is called infundibulum. So the infundibulum are infundibular part of the right ventricle. Funnel shape part. Then it ends. So, and the pulmonary trunk, between the pulmonary trunk and the right ventricle, we have the pulmonary valve. If you can see, this is the pulmonary valve here, which has three sibilunar valves. And now one anterior, two posterior. sibilunar valves. هذه الفالفز عادة تكون circular shape، تشوفونها مثل ساك. It's attached from inferior border to the wall of the pulmonary trunk and also from the side. شلون each side، يعني هذه عندنا anterior هذه هيك تكون from side attached to the wall inferiorly also attached, making like a pocket مثل pocket side. تشوفونها هذه it's resembling pocket. So during systole, the blood will push these sibilunar valve against the wall, and the blood will goes up. Okay, this will get pushed against the wall. Then, when there is systole relaxation, the blood will goes back, filling these and closing the valve, and prevent regurgitation of the blood to the right ventricle. We said that receive blood through the right atrioventricular orifice, and then the blood will pump out of the right ventricle through the pulmonary trunk. قلنا pulmonary trunk, the outlet, it's narrowed to form the infundibulum. Then the pulmonary trunk runs anteriorly, divided into the right. So here actually looks like this. So like this. So right pulmonary trunk inferiorly, تكون inferior to the arch of the aorta. Okay? The arch of the aorta, inferior surface of the arch of the aorta attached to the pulmonary trunk through a ligament called ligamentum arteriosum. هذه تشوفونها هذه الليجمنت؟ نعم هذه. It's called ligamentum arteriosum. Okay? هذه in biological life, it's a connection, an artery between the systemic and pulmonary circulation. There is communication. شلون الاتريا بيناتهم orifice تكون بالembryological life. Also here, between the pulmonary trunk and the arch of the aorta, there is an artery called ductus arteriosus يسموها. When it obliterated before birth or immediately after birth, this ductus arteriosus will get obliterated and forming the ligamentum arteriosum. Okay? In some pathological condition, this may exist even after birth. So the condition referred to as patent ductus arteriosus. ليش متأخر؟ Between the arch of the aorta and pulmonary trunk. Then, this is regarding the right ventricle. Left ventricle, you can see here, it's 3 times thicker than the right ventricle. Okay? And we said that the pressure inside the left ventricle is 6 times higher than the pressure inside the right ventricle. It has same orientation, trabeculae carni, capillary muscles, no moderator band in the left ventricle. This papillary muscle, ordinary trabeculae carni are rich, and the left atrium, it also resembles the right atrium. It has also main cavity proper. Same arrangement or orientation of the right atrium. So we have main cavity proper and we have the left auricle. So this is the left auricle. They also internally they have same structure. Do you see pectinate muscle here within the left auricle, and smooth wall within the main cavity atrium proper of the left side, left atrium proper. Left atrium receives the opening of the 4 pulmonary arteries. So and the 2 pulmonary arteries in each side. هذه هنا أهم من 2 models. So we have 4 pulmonary arteries opened in the left atrium. The left atrium connected with the left ventricle through the left atrioventricular orifice, which is guarded by bicuspid valve or mitral valve. The mitral valve has 2 cusps, anterior and posterior cusp. Okay. The arrangement here is same. We have 2 papillary muscles and chorda tendini attaching to the end of the papillary muscle from one end, the other end attached to the surface of the mitral valve cusp. Okay. طبعا here the outlet of the left ventricle, we have the aortic. So here, this is the right side, we have left side here. So if you see here, this is the wall of the left ventricle, هذه intraventricular carni. هذه constricted or narrow part of the left ventricular outlet, هذه part called aortic vestibule. Aortic vestibule means the entrance to the aorta. So the aorta is guarded by also semilunar valve, which resembles the pulmonary valve. Here, an aortic valve, or which consists of 3 semilunar valves. The arrangement here is different from the pulmonary. So we have 2 anterior, right and left coronary semilunar valve, and then posterior, 1 posterior. So right, left, anterior semilunar valve, and 1 posterior. And then the wall of these semilunar valves تكون عادة bulged laterally to form the aortic sinus. هذه الاريا هو aortic sinus. هي نفس اليومن مالت السيميليونر valve. You see here the wall of the aorta, this side, the left side, it will give rise to the left coronary artery. هذا الارتري اللي تشوفونه, this is the left coronary artery. On the right side, it gives rise to the right coronary artery. هذا the right coronary artery originated from the wall of the right anterior semilunar valve. Okay? هذه from right anterior aortic sinus. Okay? So هذه right coronary artery, left coronary artery, arising from the wall of the ascending thoracic aorta. So here we have the ascending thoracic aorta. So it's ascending thoracic aorta give rise to right and left coronary arteries only. Two anterior, 1 posterior for the aortic valve. While in the case of pulmonary, we have 1 anterior, 2 posterior. واضح؟ Opposite. Aorta, 2 anterior, 1 posterior. Pulmonary, 2 anterior. هذا الارينجمنت مالته تكون pulmonary. We have 2 anterior, 1 posterior. واضح؟ 2 anterior, 1 posterior. So, this is regarding the chamber structures of the heart itself. And عندنا قلنا aorta, we have ascending thoracic aorta until the level of the sternal angle. It will arch. The arch will run backward to the left. Okay. Then it bends downward to form at the level of the sternal angle again, forms the descending thoracic aorta. The arch of the aorta, it gives 3 branches. Brachiocephalic trunk, which give rise to the right subclavian and right common carotid, while the left common carotid and left subclavian, they are directly arise from the arch of the aorta. Then descending thoracic aorta, it gives rise to the posterior intercostal arteries. هذه شنو posterior intercostal arteries, and also it gives rise to the bronchial artery. هذا the center هو bronchial artery. The 2 or 3 bronchial arteries to the bronchial tree supplies the lung and bronchial tree. It also gives esophageal artery, supplies the esophagus. And it also, so esophageal, bronchial, and precardial. Precardial supplies the precardium of the heart. So the posterior intercostal of the lower and the lower 10 from 3rd until 11 والسبكوستال هم يعطينا اياه subcostal artery واضح؟ So these are the branch of the different parts of the aorta. Any question? القسطرة شنو هو catheterization. catheter مثل الصوندة they pass it through the either femoral artery here, then from the femoral artery goes to the external iliac, بعدين common iliac، بعدين abdominal aorta لحد ما thoracic aorta يوصل لهنا through the arch of the aorta، بعدين يدخل للcoronary arteries. هذه اللي اسمها الواير الكاثيتر يدخل للcoronary arteries يحقنون داي صبغ. It will color the coronary circulation, coronary artery branch of the coronary artery. So one in each go. يعني أول شيء right coronary artery مثلا يشوف شنو defect في coronary arteries. Is there narrowing, closure, which branch is blocked, which branch is narrow, the percentage of narrowing, okay, and where is the position of the narrowing, okay, to diagnose the coronary artery diseases, okay, and it will be for both. So this is the it's called the coronary artery catheterization. Heart. The arterial supply of the heart comes from the coronary arteries. واضح? We have right and left coronary arteries. We mentioned that the right coronary artery arises from the right aortic sinus. Runs in the groove between the atrium and the ventricle. This is called atrioventricular groove. The right atrioventricular groove. Here, between the left atrium and the left ventricle, this is the left atrioventricular groove or sulcus. Yeah? So the right coronary artery runs in the right atrioventricular groove. Okay? Runs around, gives anterior ventricular branch, then here it gives a right conus artery طبعا للinfundibulum, then ventricular and anterior ventricular branches, then it will give the marginal. هذه عندنا right marginal artery, okay? Then continue in the atrioventricular groove, gives the posterior ventricular, and the continuation of the right coronary artery runs till posterior interventricular groove. قلنا هذا الجروف between two ventricles called posterior interventricular groove, which marks the interventricular septum externally. So the continuation of the right coronary artery is posterior interventricular artery. واضح؟ Or it's called posterior ascending artery. Sorry, posterior descending artery. Posterior descending artery. And anterior descending, وهذه posterior interventricular or posterior descending artery. مختصر مالته PDA. Okay? So this is regarding the right coronary artery. قلنا right atrioventricular groove gives conus, right conus branch, 3 or 2 ventricular. The larger of them هو right marginal. Right marginal يمشي بالinferior border. هذا inferior border of the heart. هذا right marginal artery. Continuation مالته right ventricle يعطينا 2 or 3 posterior ventricular arteries. هذه ventricular branches. Posterior ventricular branches. عندنا continuation مالته هذه يمشي بالposterior interventricular group يسموها posterior interventricular artery or posterior descending artery. هذه so the right ventricle it also gives atrial branch, anterior and lateral part, and also here it gives posterior atrial branch, supplies the posterior surface of the right atrium and also left atrium. It also supplies the SA node, sinoatrial node. هذه هو part of the conducting system. واضح؟ posterior interventricular artery supplies the posterior third of the interventricular septum. هذا عندنا interventricular septum. The posterior third of the septum supplied by the posterior interventricular artery or posterior descending artery. While the anterior two third, هاي الجزء anterior two third supplied by the left coronary artery. هسه نيجي عليها. left coronary artery هذا عندكم left coronary artery arises from the left coronary and left aortic sinus, also runs in the groove left atrioventricle. It runs between the pulmonary trunk and the left auricle, then runs within the left atrioventricular groove. Within the left atrioventricular groove, it gives two branches here. Gives two branches, and left anterior descending artery, left anterior descending artery runs بالanterior interventricular groove. عندنا هنا left anterior descending يسموها LAT. L left anterior A descending, okay, LAT left anterior descending artery. وعندنا posterior descending artery هذا posterior interventricular artery هذه يمشي بالposterior interventricular group. هذه من الرايت هذه من left. واضح؟ بعدين then the second branch هذه هو circumflex. Circumflex branch. Circumflex runs بالatrioventricular group, left atrioventricular group. يعطينا circumflex. It will give the هذه البرانش المين برانش هو left marginal. قلنا right marginal يطلع من right coronary. left marginal يطلع من circumflex. left marginal supplies the left margin. طبعا اللات left anterior descending يمشي بالanterior interventricular groove toward the apex. It supplies the apex of the heart and also the anterior two-thirds of the interventricular septum. It gives sometimes هذه اللات gives هذه lateral branch or يسموها diagonal branch. هذه diagonal. هذا البرانش تشوفونه هذه يسموها diagonal from the anterior interventricular. الcircumflex يعطينا ventricular anterior ventricular and also قلنا يعطينا marginal left marginal ويعطينا posterior ventricular. واضح؟ الكونتينويشن مالته هذه posterior ventricular of the circumflex. واضح؟ هذه left marginal. اوكي؟ وعندنا هذه anterior ventricular branches وهذه diagonal. طبعا هنا همينه left coronary يعطينا branch هنا left conus. هذه تشوفونه هذا الارتري. هنا right conus from the right coronary, left conus and then left coronary. واضح؟ So the left coronary artery supplies left ventricle, part of the left ventricle, left atrium or left auricle, and left ventricle, anterior two-thirds of the atrioventricular septum. واضح؟ and it also supplies the part of the right ventricle. واضح؟ So, to summarize it, the right coronary artery supplies the right atrium, right and left atrium, except the left auricle, right ventricle, okay, and the right coronary, right ventricle, and posterior third of the interventricular septum. SA node, sinoarterial node, هذا 60% of the population. 40% of the population it's supplied by the left coronary artery. AB node عندنا همين atrioventricular node, with 80% of circulation supplied by the right coronary, while 20% it's supplied by left coronary. The left coronary supplies the left auricle, left ventricle, عندنا anterior two-thirds of the interventricular septum. قلنا SA node in 40% of the population, AB node in 20% of the population. واضح؟ Any question? Veins. قلنا great cardiac vein, middle cardiac vein, and lesser cardiac vein. The great cardiac vein anteriorly هذا هو follows the LID, anterior interventricular artery, or نسميها left anterior descending artery. لا هذا هو great cardiac vein. اوكي عندنا lesser cardiac vein. هذه lesser cardiac vein follows the left marginal. واضح؟ lesser cardiac vein, lesser cardiac vein, great cardiac vein. Then we have middle cardiac vein. The middle cardiac vein here, middle cardiac vein يمشي بالposterior. The middle cardiac vein follows the posterior interventricular groove on the posterior follows the posterior interventricular artery or posterior descending artery within the posterior interventricular groove. So middle cardiac vein and هنا lesser cardiac, great cardiac. They form together coronary sinus. هذا عندنا coronary sinus. This is the coronary sinus, which drains into the right atrium. واضح؟ So these three veins, middle cardiac, lesser cardiac, lesser cardiac هذه middle, lesser right follows the right marginal, وعندنا great cardiac. Then together great cardiac يمشي بالanterior interventricular groove, then it runs in the atrioventricular groove, joins the lesser cardiac. Sorry, no, this is the left margin. Sorry, left marginal vein. And lesser cardiac here. Okay, lesser cardiac here. It joins the great cardiac, then left marginal. بعدين عندنا الميدل cardiac drains directly into the coronary sinus. So these together forms the coronary sinus. Coronary sinus, we mentioned that it ends open in the right atrium between the opening of the inferior vena cava posteriorly and the right atrioventricular orifice anteriorly. هذه the opening of the coronary sinus. And the atrium is drained by the anterior cardiac vein. The anterior cardiac vein drains the arterial wall and it opens directly on the arterial wall. واضح؟ ما تنتهي بالcoronary sinus. The anterior cardiac drains the cardiac atrial wall, opens directly within the atrium. In addition to other small veins, as we mentioned there, they open directly on the atrial wall. So this is regarding the blood supply, the arterial, coronary artery and their branch, and venous drainage. In the venous drainage, we have great cardiac, lesser cardiac, and then posteriorly middle cardiac. They drain the different part of the cardiac muscle into the coronary sinus. Coronary sinus وين موجودة؟ تمشي posterior and atrioventricular groove between the left ventricle and left atrium. هذا هو coronary sinus. Then until it opens right atrium. واضح؟ Medial to the inferior vena cava.